In a distant valley, surrounded by tranquil mountains and rivers, there was an ancient monastery, a place of silence and wisdom. 500 monks lived there under the guidance of a Zen master, a man who had dedicated his life to the pursuit of truth and the practice of inner peace. This monastery was renowned as a sanctuary for those seeking self-realization, a place where simply existing became a spiritual practice. One day, a man arrived at the monastery. He had an intense desire. He wanted to understand the mind, to calm the incessant stream of thoughts that troubled his peace. He had heard about the Zen master, about his deep wisdom and the spiritual path practiced there, and decided this was his only chance to find answers. When he met the master, the man declared his wish to become a disciple. More than anything, he wanted to silence his mind and discover the truth. The Zen master, a man with a calm and penetrating gaze, looked deeply at the visitor. There was a long pause, as if the master were examining not just the man's words, but also his deepest intentions. Finally, with a serene voice, the master replied, "Knowing the truth is not simple, and it may take a lifetime. There's always the chance you may never find it." The master questioned the man's commitment, wanting to know if he was truly prepared to face sacrifices, to abandon everything he knew, and to devote himself fully to the path. The man, firm in his resolve, replied that he was ready for any sacrifice, that he would face any obstacle to calm his mind and discover the truth. He no longer wanted to live tormented by the endless thoughts that imprisoned him. With a slight smile, the master nodded, accepting him as a disciple. But what the man did not know was that this journey would be far more challenging and profound than he could ever imagine. The next day, the new disciple was brought to the Zen master. He was eager to begin, perhaps expecting profound lessons, meditations, or teachings that would lead him to a state of peace. But the master had other plans. Instead of offering instructions on meditation or spiritual practices, the master handed the disciple a simple tool, a wooden pestle, and led him to a storage room where countless bags of rice were piled up. In a calm voice, he explained the task. "You will pound rice for all the monks in the monastery, every day from dawn until dusk, without speaking to anyone, without doing anything else. Just pound the rice." The disciple was confused. Pounding rice? This was not what he expected when he asked to become a follower of the master. He had come searching for truth, for a way to calm his mind, and this simple task seemed to have nothing to do with what he had envisioned. Yet, the master looked into his eyes, silently, as if to say, "This is the way," and without further explanation, the master walked away. The disciple began his work. At first, he felt enormous resistance. Each strike of the pestle on the rice felt like a waste of his time and energy. His mind rebelled, questioning the purpose of such a mundane task. He thought, "Why am I doing this? How will this help me find the peace I seek?" As days passed, his despair and frustration grew. His mind was restless, like a stormy sea. Thoughts and doubts flooded his mind every moment. Does the master know what he's doing? I left my life for this. But he had promised to obey the master, and knew that giving up now was not an option. So he continued. Over time, he began to realize that the real battle was not with the work, but with his own mind. It was his own restlessness, the flood of thoughts and expectations, that made the task so hard. Day after day, strike after strike, he began to understand that this seemingly simple task was forcing him to face his own mind in a way he had never done before. He was confronted with all the thoughts and anxieties he had carried for years. Without the distraction of conversations or other activities, his mind began to thrash against the silence, revealing layers and layers of accumulated thoughts. There was nowhere to escape. All he could do was continue pounding the rice and helplessly observe as his mind insisted on rebelling. Gradually, he began to realize that perhaps this was the master's true teaching, to face, without turning away, everything that arose within him, without fleeing or trying to control it. As the days passed, the routine of pounding rice became the disciple's daily reality. He woke at dawn, went to the storage room, and began his task. Hour after hour, he repeated the movement, 1 pound, then another, never stopping. In the first months, the challenge felt unbearable. His mind was in a constant state of resistance. He felt a sort of emotional pain, a restlessness that came from the monotony, the silence, and the solitude. Pounding rice seemed like a tedious, meaningless task, and his mind fought fiercely against it. There's so much knowledge to seek, so many mysteries to explore, he thought, and I'm stuck here, pounding rice day after day. The endless repetition felt like torture, and with each strike of the pestle, he felt his mind wandering, imagining alternative scenarios, remembering his past, even planning what he would do in the future. But with no one to talk to and no distractions, these thoughts troubled him even more. Nevertheless, he persisted, and over time, a subtle change began to occur. He started to notice that the more he resisted, the more intense and persistent his thoughts became. But when he accepted the task and stopped fighting it, a brief relief settled in. Gradually, he began to understand that instead of trying to push his thoughts away, he just needed to observe them, letting them come and go like waves. Slowly, the internal noise started to lose its power. His mind was still filled with thoughts, but now they passed more quickly, without as much weight. He began to learn something profound. The more he tried to control his mind, the more it controlled him. When he stopped fighting, the chaos inside him began to calm on its own. As the months went by, he focused more and more on the task itself. There was no longer a desire for other teachings. He was immersed in the rhythm. He heard the sound of the pestle hitting the rice, felt the texture of the grains under his hands, and noticed the small clouds of dust rising. He was learning to be present in each moment, even in the smallest details. The repetition led him to a new discovery. He no longer saw himself as the man who pounds rice, but simply as the action itself. It was as if he had ceased to be an eye, observing, and had simply become the pounding, the movement. In that moment, he no longer thought about why he was there, nor what would happen afterward. He only existed in that, in each strike of the rice, and for a few moments, his mind was silent. The master's teaching was starting to make sense. He had not given the disciple an insignificant task. Instead, he had offered the greatest lesson of all, that the silence of the mind does not come by force or imposition, but by total surrender to the present. No past, no future, just the moment, just the pounding. As the months turned into years, the disciple's mind began to quiet in a way he had never experienced before. He still had thoughts, of course, but they came as whispers instead of shouts, and they no longer occupied the center of his attention. Now, he was present in the pounding of the rice, in the repetitive sound filling the space, in the smallest details of the moment. It was as if he had come to exist in a dimension where time and ego were irrelevant. With each strike of the rice, he lost a bit of himself. He became less of a someone, and more simply the action, a continuous movement, without beginning or end. He began to forget his own name, the reason for being there, and even the quest that had once driven him to come to the monastery. All of it dissolved in the simplicity of the act of pounding rice. For 12 years, this became the disciple's life. He woke, went to the storage room, and in silence performed the same task. There was no rush, no ambition, no expectation. All that remained was the present moment, and within that moment, a peace he had never imagined possible. Instead of being an insignificant task, the activity of pounding rice revealed itself as a portal to a state of complete present. It was a meditation in motion, where there was no room for the I, for the past or the future. All that existed was the now, and within this now, there was no disturbance. Over these years, he came to understand, in a quiet and subtle way, the depth of the Master's teaching. He did not need words, books, or great revelation. The truth was there, hidden in the simplicity of direct experience, with no need for interpretation. Over time, he became the rice disciple, a person without identity or aspirations, simply a being completely present in each action, without desires or inner conflicts. The excessive thinking that once tormented him had disappeared, leaving only silence, a deep and vast silence he never thought he could find. With his health declining, the Zen master felt that his time in the monastery was coming to an end. He needed to choose a successor, someone who could carry on the legacy of his practice and transmit the teachings in the most authentic and pure way. To do this, he gathered the disciples and announced his wish to find the one who had achieved the deepest realization. He asked each to write a few words summarizing their understanding of the spiritual path and the nature of the mind. It was a test not only of knowledge but of true wisdom, an understanding that transcends theory. One of the senior disciples, a studious and devoted man, was particularly excited about the opportunity. He had spent decades reading scriptures and studying Zen teachings. He believed he had the perfect answer for the master's request. With great care, he wrote down his understanding on a scroll. His words spoke of the mind as a mirror that, to reflect truth, needed to be cleansed of the dust of thoughts and illusions. To him, the practice of meditation was like polishing the mirror, clearing the mind so truth could be reflected without distortion. When the master read the disciple's words, an expression of frustration appeared on his face. He shook his head with disappointment and, in a firm voice, rejected the message. He declared that those words, although well phrased, were just a superficial interpretation of what Zen practice truly meant. The senior disciple was shocked, unable to understand why his master considered his words inadequate. After all, he had studied and practiced for so many years. Other disciples were also surprised, murmuring among themselves about why the master had rejected his words. How could such a carefully constructed understanding be wrong? It was then that the disciple who had spent years pounding rice, now known as the rice disciple, overheard the discussion and smiled to himself. He understood that the master was right to reject those words, for true understanding could not be captured in concepts or metaphors. And there, in that moment, the rice disciple was about to reveal what he had discovered. After hearing the master reject the words of the senior disciple, the rice disciple gave a soft laugh, a sincere and unpretentious laugh. He had spent years in silence, immersed in a task as simple as it was profound, and, with no desire to impress or compete, he understood that true wisdom could not be reduced to a concept or an image. The other disciples, noticing his reaction, approached him. One asked, in a challenging tone, "So, do you think you could write something better?" The rice disciple looked at them with a serene gaze and humbly replied, "I am illiterate, I cannot read or write, but if you wish, I can dictate a few words." Curious, the disciples provided paper and ink, and asked him to share what he had learned in his years of silent practice. In a calm and deep tone, he began to dictate, "The mind is not a mirror. There is no mirror, no mind, and without mind, there is nowhere for dust to settle." These simple yet powerful words made the disciples stop to reflect. The metaphor the senior disciple used, describing the mind as a mirror needing polishing, was completely dismantled by this deeper view. The very idea of mind was, for the rice disciple, just an illusion. When the master read the words dictated by the rice disciple, he smiled with an expression of peace and contentment. Here was the essence of the Zen teaching, an understanding that transcended any description or concept. Unlike complex interpretations, this direct insight demonstrated the experience of someone who had truly freed himself from the chains of the mind. The other disciples were astonished. Many had studied for decades, immersed in theories and complex practices, yet the one who had dedicated himself solely to a simple task, without seeking recognition or progress, had grasped a truth they had all overlooked. The master then approached the rice disciple and respectfully declared him his successor. He recognized that, among all the disciples, he was the one who had achieved the purest and deepest realization, without getting lost in concepts or theories. The rice disciple's wisdom came from direct experience, from his total surrender to presence in the moment. For the rice disciple, however, the title of successor meant nothing. He desired nothing more than to continue in his state of peace and simplicity. He saw his realization as something that needed no recognition, and with humility, he accepted the master's decision without any attachment. In that moment, the rice disciple had transcended the mind and the ego, and this was something that needed no words to be understood, only silence. After naming the rice disciple his successor, the Zen master approached him privately and shared a few final words. With a deep, affectionate gaze, he warned him in a calm but serious tone. "Now that you have been chosen as my successor, it is possible that other disciples, driven by envy or wounded pride, may try to disrupt your peace. Your understanding and wisdom may provoke resentment in those who are still caught in their own ambitions and desires." The rice disciple listened attentively. He felt no pride in his position, nor did he consider himself superior. For him, the title of successor changed nothing in his essence, but he understood the importance of the master's words. The master then advised him to leave the monastery quietly. Although he had been chosen to succeed the master, his true role was to continue in the simplicity and freedom he had achieved. The peace he found did not need to be sustained in a specific place or in a formal position. It existed within him, independent of where he was. Before leaving, the rice disciple bid farewell to the master with a silent bow, in gratitude for all the years of silent guidance and for the task that had led him to such a deep understanding. He did not need to say anything, for he knew the master understood. As he left the monastery, he carried with him the most important lesson he had discovered, that true peace is not found in a position or a title, but in the ability to live fully in the present moment. He learned that the mind, with all its thoughts, doubts, and anxieties, was merely an illusion, a passing mist that dissipated when he surrendered completely to the now. The story ends with a reflection on the essence of meditation, to be completely present in what one does, just as the rice disciple, who achieved self-realization not through theories or formal practices, but through total absorption in his work. Instead of fighting thoughts or seeking answers, he found peace simply by being. This is the true teaching, one that transcends any words. The quiet of the mind is found in full presence, where there is no past, no future, only the pure and complete present. So, what did you think of this story? Often, we seek complex answers for problems that have simpler solutions than we realize. As we've seen, true peace may lie in something as simple as being present in the moment. If you enjoyed this video and feel it could help others, please don't forget to leave a like. It really helps spread this message to others who, like you, may be searching for a little inner peace. And if you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do so and hit the bell to stay updated on our upcoming stories and reflections. Thank you for being with us until the end, and we'll see you in the next video.